The connection pool maintains a set of persistent database connections available for client acquisition. Each connection instance enters the pool through initialization during system startup or dynamic allocation. Connections remain in the pool until explicitly closed or deemed invalid. The pool size parameter controls maximum concurrent connections. Default allocation begins at 20% of maximum capacity. Connections are stored in an internal queue structure ordered by creation timestamp. The acquisition phase begins when a client requests a connection from the pool. The pool manager checks available idle connections first. If an idle connection exists and passes validation checks, it transitions to the acquired state and returns to the requesting client. Validation involves executing a lightweight ping query against the underlying database. Connections that fail validation are marked for closure and removed from the pool. Acquisition timeout defaults to 30 seconds. When no idle connections are available and the pool has not reached maximum capacity, a new connection is created. The initialization process establishes a TCP connection to the database endpoint and performs authentication. Configuration parameters including socket timeout and network buffer size are applied during this phase. Once established, the new connection enters the acquired state and is returned to the client. New connection creation typically requires 50 to 200 milliseconds. If the pool has reached maximum capacity and all connections are acquired, the requesting client enters a wait queue. The queue operates on first-in first-out ordering. Clients wait until a connection becomes available through release by another client. Queue position is tracked internally by request sequence number. Maximum wait time is controlled by the acquisition timeout parameter. If timeout is exceeded, an exception is raised to the requesting client and the queue position is removed. Connection retention occurs when a client holds an acquired connection and executes queries. The connection remains in the acquired state during this period. A lease timer begins when acquisition occurs. The lease timeout parameter specifies maximum duration for continuous connection ownership. Default lease timeout is 10 minutes. If a client fails to release a connection before timeout expiration, the connection is forcibly closed. Ungraceful closure triggers an audit log entry. During retention, the pool monitors connection health through periodic validation. Idle timeout is distinct from lease timeout. If a connection is acquired but receives no query traffic for the idle timeout duration, a validation ping is executed. Idle timeout defaults to 5 minutes. Connections that fail validation during retention are closed and replaced. This mechanism detects network interruptions or database restarts that would otherwise go unnoticed until actual query execution. The release phase occurs when a client explicitly returns a connection to the pool. Release is typically triggered by calling the close method on the connection object. Upon release, the connection is validated once more. If validation succeeds, the connection transitions to idle state and returns to the available pool. The connection retains its session state including transaction isolation level and any active transaction. Transaction state persists across multiple acquisitions by different clients. Idle connections in the pool are subject to background maintenance processes. The eviction daemon runs at configurable intervals, defaults to every 5 minutes. Idle timeout for connections in the pool differs from lease timeout. Pool idle timeout defaults to 30 minutes. Connections exceeding pool idle timeout are eligible for eviction. The eviction algorithm selects victims based on creation timestamp, preferring oldest connections first. Eviction reduces pool size toward the configured minimum. Closure protocol is initiated either by explicit client request or by pool management during eviction. Graceful closure involves sending a termination message to the database and awaiting confirmation. The close timeout parameter limits duration of graceful closure. Default is 5 seconds. If graceful closure does not complete within timeout, the connection is force closed. Force closure immediately terminates the socket connection without notification to the database. Force closure is logged at warning level. Connection state transitions are recorded in an internal state machine. Valid states are created, validating, idle, acquired, closing, and closed. State transitions occur atomically to prevent race conditions. The state machine enforces valid transitions only. Invalid transitions raise an exception. State history is maintained in memory for the most recent 1,000 transitions per connection. State history is useful for debugging connection lifecycle issues and timeout problems. Connection statistics are aggregated and exposed through monitoring endpoints. Total connections created tracks cumulative connection initiations. Active connection count tracks currently acquired connections. Idle connection count tracks available pool members. Connection errors track failed validations and closed connections. Mean acquisition time measures average latency from request to successful acquisition. These metrics are updated continuously and reset upon configurable intervals, default daily. Configuration parameters control pool behavior at startup. Min pool size specifies minimum idle connections maintained, default 10. Max pool size specifies maximum concurrent connections, default 100. Acquisition timeout default is 30 seconds. Lease timeout default is 10 minutes. Pool idle timeout default is 30 minutes. Connection validation interval default is 5 minutes. These parameters can be modified through configuration file or programmatic API. Parameter changes require pool restart. Exception handling during acquisition includes several specific error conditions. Connection timeout occurs when acquisition timeout expires. Pool exhaustion occurs when max capacity is reached and all connections are leased. Validation failure occurs when ping query fails. These exceptions propagate to the requesting client. Exception type indicates the underlying cause and guides appropriate client-side handling. Retry logic should typically not be implemented by clients, as the pool handles internal retries. Connection reset is a maintenance operation. It closes all connections and reinitializes the pool. Reset is typically triggered during database failover or maintenance windows. Reset flushes all idle connections immediately. Reset waits for acquired connections to be released before closing. Reset timeout defaults to 2 minutes. If any acquired connection does not release before timeout, those connections are force closed. Reset operation is logged at informational level with timestamp. Thread safety is guaranteed through internal synchronization mechanisms. Acquisition and release operations use lock-free data structures where possible. Connection state transitions use atomic compare and swap operations. Queue operations are protected by mutex locks. Statistics updates use atomic counters. Multiple client threads can safely call acquisition and release methods concurrently. Deadlock is prevented through consistent lock ordering. No external synchronization is required by client applications. Connection pool lifecycle ends with shutdown operation. Shutdown closes all connections gracefully and releases all resources. Shutdown accepts a timeout parameter, default 60 seconds. All idle connections are closed immediately. All acquired connections are given time to release. After timeout expiration, remaining connections are force closed. Shutdown operation blocks until all connections are closed. Final statistics are logged at shutdown completion. The pool cannot be reused after shutdown.